Greetings, this is Jeff Riddle, pastor of Christ Reformed Baptist Church in Louisa, Virginia. This is another in this occasional series of readings from and brief notes and commentary upon Eusebius of Caesarea's The Ecclesiastical History. Here is Book 10, chapters 8 and 9. Chapter 8. Such then were the gifts that the divine and heavenly grace of our Savior bestowed upon us by his appearing. And such was the abundance of good things that the peace which came to us procured for all mankind. And thus our happy state was celebrated with rejoicings and festive assemblies. Nevertheless, the envy that hates the good, even the demon who loves the evil, could not endure the sight of what he beheld. As indeed that which had happened to the above-mentioned tyrants was not sufficient, even for Licinius, to bring him to sound reason. He who had been deemed worthy of the principate in a state of prosperity, of second-rate rank after the great emperor Constantine, of a connection by marriage and the most exalted kinship with him, ceased from the following of good men and zealously affected the evil manners and wickedness of the impious tyrants. And he preferred to follow the judgments of those whose end he had seen with his very eyes, rather than continue on terms of friendship and love with his superior. Filled, in fact, with envy of the common benefactor, he waged an impious and most terrible war against him, neither giving respect to the laws of nature, nor bestowing a thought on sworn treaties or ties of blood or agreements. For Constantine, all gracious emperor that he was, furnished him with the tokens of genuine goodwill, did not grudge him kinship with himself, and did not refuse him the enjoyment of an illustrious union in the person of his sister. Nay, further, he deemed him worthy to partake of his ancestral nobility and his imperial blood and origin, and bestowed on him as a brother-in-law and joint emperor the right to a share in the supreme government. For of his bounty he gave him the ruling and administration of no inferior part of the peoples under the Roman sway. But Licinius pursued an exactly opposite line of conduct. He was daily contriving all kinds of devices against his superior, and inventing all manner of plans to reward his benefactor with evil. At first, indeed, he attempted to conceal the intrigue, and feigned friendliness, hoping that frequent recourse to guile and deceit would most easily secure his expectations. But God proved to be Constantine's friend and protector and guardian, who brought to light the plots that were devised secretly and in darkness, and confounded them. Such power is there in the great weapon of godliness to ward off the enemy and to preserve its own in safety. Fenced verily with this, our emperor, and most dear to God, escaped the plots of this ill-famed master of intrigue. And he, when he saw that his covert design was by no means going according to his wish, for God disclosed every guile and wickedness to the emperor whom he loved, since he was no longer able to conceal himself, raised an open warfare. And to be sure, in his decision to make war at close quarters upon Constantine, he was already hastening to battle also against the God of the universe, whom, as he knew, Constantine worshipped. And so he designed an attack, quietly and silently at first, upon his godly subjects, who had never at any time done any harm at all to his rule. And this he did because his innate wickedness had perforce brought upon him terrible blindness. Thus he neither kept before his eyes the memory of those who had persecuted Christians before him, nor of those whom he himself destroyed and punished for the evil deeds they had pursued. But he turned aside from the path of sound reason, and, becoming altogether mad, decided to make war on God himself, as the protector of Constantine, instead of on him who was being protected. First, he drove away every Christian from his palace, thus by his own act depriving himself, wretched man, of the prayers to God on his behalf, which, after the custom of their fathers, they are taught to make for all men. Then he gave orders that the soldiers in cities were to be singled out and deprived of honorable rank, unless they chose to sacrifice to demons. And moreover, these were but small matters when judged by comparison with graver measures. What need is there to mention singly and successively the things done by this hater of God? How to wit this most lawless of men invented lawless laws. In fact, with regard to those who were suffering under imprisonment, he laid down a law that no one should treat them humanely by distributing food, or have pity on those who were perishing of hunger in bonds, and that no one should be kindly at all, or do any kindly action, even when they were moved by mere natural feelings to sympathize with their neighbors. And of his laws, this one, at least, was quite openly shameless and the harshest of all, in its putting aside of every civilized, natural feeling, by which also it was enacted as a punishment, that those who showed pity should suffer the same as those whom they pitied, and that those who humanely ministered should endure the same punishment as those who were undergoing it, and be consigned to bonds and imprisonment. Such were the ordinances of Licinius. Why should one recount his innovations with regard to marriage, or his revolutionary changes in respect of those who were departing this life, wherein he dared to annul the ancient laws of the Romans, well and wisely laid down, and in their stead brought in certain that were barbarous and uncivilized, that truly were lawless and contrary to law, or the countless assessments that he devised to the detriment of his subject peoples, and the manifold exaction of gold and silver, the revaluation of land, and the lucrative fines of men in the country parts no longer alive but long since departed. And moreover, as to the banishments that this hater of mankind inflicted upon those who had done no wrong, the arrests of noble and highly esteemed men, whose wedded wives he separated from them and consigned to certain abominable members of his household for disgraceful insult, as to the many married women and unwedded girls with whom this drunken old dotard satisfied his soul's unbridled lust, why should one enlarge on these things, when the outrageous character of his last deeds show the first to be small and of no account? For example, in the final stage of his madness, he proceeded against the bishops, and deeming them opposed to his doings as being the servants of the supreme God, forthwith plotted against them, not openly as yet, for he feared his superior, but once more with secrecy and guile. And the most highly respected of these, by the contrivance of the governors, he put to death. And the manner in which they were murdered was strange and hitherto unheard of. For instance, the things that were done at Amasia and the other cities of Pontus outdid every excess of cruelty. There some of the churches of God were again thrown down from the top to the bottom. Others they shut up, so that none of the accustomed worshippers might assemble or pray to God to do service unto him. For he did not think that the prayers were offered on his behalf. Such was the reckoning of an evil conscience, but had been persuaded that we did everything and supplicated God on behalf of the emperor whom he loved. Hence he hastened to vent his wrath on us. And in truth, the sycophants among the governors, persuaded that they were doing what pleased the impious man, plied some of the bishops with penalties suitable for malefactors, and those who had done no wrong were led away and punished without a pretext, like murderers. And some endured at that time a more novel form of death. Their bodies were cut with a sword into many pieces, and after this cruel and most fearful sight, they were cast into the depths of the sea as food for fishes. Thereupon the men of God began again to flee, and once more the fields, once more the deserts, glens, and mountains received the servants of Christ. And when the impious man was thus successful in these measures also, he then conceived the idea of stirring up anew the persecution against all. He had power to accomplish his purpose, and there was nothing to hinder him carrying it into effect, had not God, the champion of the souls that are his own, foreseeing with all speed what would come to pass, caused to shine forth all at once, as it were out of deep darkness and the most murky night, a great luminary and Savior of them all, leading them thither with a lofty arm, his servant Constantine. Chapter 9. To him then was the worthy fruit of piety, did God vouchsafe from heaven above the trophies of victory over the wicked men. As for the guilty one, he laid him low, with all his counselors and friends, prone beneath the feet of Constantine. For when Licinius had carried his madness to the uttermost, the emperor, the friend of God, reckoning that he was no longer to be endured, summoned his sound powers of reason, and tempering the stern qualities of justice with humanity, determined to succor those who were being evil treated under the tyrant's power, and hastened by putting a few spoilers out of the way to rescue the greater part of the human race. For hitherto, when he employed humanity alone and showed mercy to him who was undeserving of sympathy, there was no improvement in Licinius. He did not give over his wickedness, but rather increased his mad fury against his subject peoples. While, as for those who were ill-treated, no hope of salvation was left for them, ground down as they were by a terrible wild beast. Wherefore, mingling a hatred of evil with a love of goodness, the defender of the good went forth with that most humane emperor, his son Crispus, stretching out the right hand of salvation to all who were perishing. Then, inasmuch as they had God, the universal King and Son of God, the Savior of all, as their guide and ally, the Father and Son both together divided their battle array against the haters of God on all sides, and easily won the victory. For everything in the encounter was made smooth for them by God according to his purpose. Yea, verily, all at once, and in less time than it takes to say it, those who the other day were breathing death and threatening were no more, nor was even so much as their name remembered. Their pictures and honors received a well-deserved disgrace. And the things that Licinius had seen with his own eyes happened to the impious tyrants of days gone by. These he himself also likewise suffered. For neither did he receive correction, nor did he learn wisdom from the strokes that fell upon his neighbors, but pursued the same path of iniquity as they did, and justly reeled over the same precipice. Thus was Licinius cast down prostrate. But Constantine, the most mighty victor, resplendent with every virtue that godliness bestows, together with his son Crispus, an emperor most dear to God, and in all respects likened to his father, recovered the East that belonged to them, and formed the Roman Empire, as in the days of old, into a single united whole, bringing under their peaceful rule all of it, from the rising sun round about in the two directions, north as well as south, even to the uttermost limits of the declining day. So then, there was taken away from men all fear of those who formerly oppressed them. They celebrated brilliant festivals, all things were filled with light, and men, formerly downcast, looked at each other with smiling countenances and beaming eyes. With dancing and hymns in city and country alike, they gave honor first of all to God, the universal King, for this they had been instructed to do, and then to the pious emperor with his sons, beloved of God. Old ills were forgotten, and oblivion cast on every deed of impiety. Present good things were enjoyed, with the further hope of those which were yet for to come. And, in short, there were promulgated in every place ordinances of the victorious emperor, full of love for humanity, and laws that betokened munificence and true piety. Thus, verily, when all tyranny had been purged away, the kingdom that belonged to them was preserved steadfast and undisputed for Constantine and his sons alone, who, when they had made it their very first action to cleanse the world from hatred of God, conscious of the good things that he had bestowed upon them, displayed their love of virtue and of God, their piety and gratitude toward the deity, by their manifest deeds in the sight of all men. Here ends Book 10 and chapters 8 and 9. And with the end of Book 10, chapters 8 and 9, we bring to a conclusion the entirety of Eusebius's ecclesiastical history. Let's move on now to some notes and commentary on these final two chapters in Book 10. These final two chapters describe the Emperor Constantine's final victory over his rival, Licinius or Licinius, to unite the Roman Empire and to ensure peace and security for the Christians. Chapter 8 describes the intrigues of Licinius against Constantine and the Christian community. Eusebius notes that although Constantine acted graciously towards Licinius, who stood second in rank to him, even giving his sister in marriage to Licinius, Licinius rejected this goodwill and rebelled against Constantine. In the end, however, God proved to be Constantine's friend and protector and guardian. In his rebellion, the ire of Licinius was not just aimed at Constantine, but also against the Christians. Eusebius notes that Licinius first drove Christians from his palace and then deprived Christian soldiers in the army of their rank. He also passed various unjust ordinances, including a law that forbade the humane distribution of food to those who were imprisoned. He banished or arrested various men of nobility and high esteem. Eusebius also accuses Licinius of immorality in his abuse of many married women and unwedded girls to satisfy his unbridled lust, as Eusebius calls Licinius a drunken old dotard. In the final stages of his madness, Eusebius says that Licinius struck against the bishops, putting some to death, and also against the churches, throwing them down from top to bottom or shutting them up. Some of those put to death had their bodies cut to pieces with the sword, and the pieces of their body were then cast into the sea as food for fishes. Many of the men of God fled again to the fields, deserts, glens, and mountains to escape this persecution. Chapter 9 notes how Constantine defeated Licinius. The humane emperor and his son Crispus stretched out the right hand of salvation by going into battle against the haters of God and quickly won the victory. Olton, the translator and editor, explains in a footnote, quote, Licinius was defeated first at Adrianople on 3 July, and secondly, when he had fled to Byzantium and had been forced to cross the straits at Chrysopolis or Scutari, September 18 or 20 in the year 324. Shortly afterwards, Constantine had him put to death, end quote. The pictures and honors of Licinius were disgraced, and he was cast down prostrate. Constantine, the most mighty victor, recovered the East and formed the Roman Empire, as in the days of old, into a single united whole. The populace had all fear taken away and celebrated the victory with brilliant festivals, as all things were filled with light. They first praised God, and then they gave praise to the Emperor Constantine and his sons. In conclusion, the ecclesiastical history thus ends with this narrative of the triumph of Constantine over Licinius and with the peace of the Christians in the Roman Empire established. Looking ahead, by the year 380, Christianity would be made the official religion of the Roman Empire by virtue of the Edict of Thessalonica issued by the Emperor Theodosius. It continues to be debated today whether Constantine's embrace and protection of the church was a blessing or a detriment to the Christian movement. Well, we bring this episode to a conclusion. Hope this has been helpful and edifying and encouraging to those who are listening. And again, with that, we bring this series to a conclusion. And I hope that the series in its entirety has been helpful to those who are listening. Take care and God bless.